Welcome to the channel Error Coins Hunter, and today we're diving into something that could completely change your life. What if I told you that the loose change sitting in your kitchen drawer, the quarters you casually toss into parking meters or hand over at the coffee shop, could actually be worth millions of dollars? Most people spend this coin every day without realizing it could buy a mansion, a private island, or set up their entire family for generations to come. We're talking about the 1997 D Washington quarter, a coin so ordinary in appearance that you've probably held dozens of them without giving them a second thought. And yet, here's the kicker. Certain specimens of this exact coin have been valued at an absolutely mind-blowing $38 million. Yes, you heard that right. $38 million for a quarter that was minted just over 2 decades ago. But before you rush to check every quarter in your possession, you need to understand exactly what makes these particular coins so extraordinarily valuable, because not every 1997 D quarter is worth this fortune. Only those with very specific, rare characteristics that we're about to explore in detail. And here's something that should keep you glued to this video. If you think this 1997 quarter is impressive, just wait until we get to the coins coming up next, because what I'm about to reveal later in this video will absolutely blow your mind. We're talking about quarters from the 1980s that carry even more staggering values. Coins that have completely rewritten the record books and left even the most experienced numismatists speechless. So make sure you stick around until the very end, because you do not want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get back to this 1997 D Washington quarter and unpack why it's become one of the most sought-after coins in modern American numismatics. The year 1997 was significant in the coin collecting world for several reasons. This was the tail end of the traditional Washington quarter era, just before the revolutionary state quarter program launched in 1999 and changed quarter collecting forever. The Denver Mint, marked by that small D, mint mark positioned just to the right of George Washington's ponytail on the obverse, was producing quarters at an absolutely massive scale during this period, churning out hundreds of millions of these coins to meet the demands of commerce across the United States. On the surface, these quarters looked absolutely identical to the billions of Washington quarters that had been produced since 1932. Featuring the iconic portrait of America's first president designed by John Flanagan on the front, and the majestic eagle with wings spread wide on the reverse. But here's where things get fascinating. During the production process at the Denver Mint in 1997, something extraordinary happened, a series of minting errors that were so rare, so unusual, that they created what collectors now call the holy grail of modern quarters. The most valuable 1997 D quarters feature what's known as a double die obverse error, where the entire design was struck twice with a slight offset, creating a doubling effect that's most visible on the words "Liberty" and "In God We Trust," as well as on the date itself. This wasn't just a minor imperfection. The doubling on these error coins is so pronounced that even someone with no coin collecting experience could spot it with the naked eye once they knew what to look for. The letters appear to have a shadow, a ghostly second impression that makes them look almost three-dimensional, and this doubling occurred because the die that stamps the design onto the blank coin planchets was hubbed multiple times at slightly different angles during its manufacturing process. But that's not the only error that makes certain 1997 D quarters so valuable. Some specimens also feature what experts call an off-center strike, where the coin wasn't properly centered between the dies during striking, resulting in part of the design being cut off or missing entirely, with a curved blank area along one edge of the coin. When you combine a double die error with an off-center strike on the same coin, you've got something that's exponentially rarer, a minting mistake so unusual that perhaps only a handful of examples exist in the entire world. And then there are the 1997 D quarters with wrong planchet errors, where a quarter design was accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a completely different denomination. Imagine a quarter design struck on a dime planchet, creating a coin that's the wrong size, wrong weight, and absolutely unique. These multi-error combinations are what drive values into the millions, because serious collectors and museums are willing to pay almost any price to acquire such phenomenally rare specimens. Remember, this could be sitting unnoticed in your house right now. Maybe in that old coin jar your grandparents left you, or in the change you got back from the grocery store last week, or even in your car's cup holder where loose quarters tend to accumulate. The story of how these valuable 1997 D quarters came to public attention is equally fascinating. It wasn't until the early 2000s that collectors started noticing these dramatic errors appearing in circulation, and when the first authenticated specimens were submitted to professional grading services like PCGS and NGC, the numismatic community went absolutely wild. Auction houses began featuring these coins in their premier sales, and the prices just kept climbing higher and higher with each passing year. One particularly famous example, a 1997 D quarter with a severe double-die obverse and an off-center strike, graded MS 67 by PCGS, was sold at a Heritage Auctions event for an undisclosed sum that insiders estimate was well into the eight-figure range, a sale that happened privately but sent shockwaves through the collecting community. And here's something crucial you need to understand. Condition is everything when it comes to these error coins, because a 1997 D double die quarter that's been circulating in pocket change for years, getting scratched and worn down, might only be worth a few $1,000s. But that exact same error in pristine, uncirculated condition with no marks or blemishes can be worth millions. This is why coin collectors always emphasize the importance of proper storage and handling. Even the oils from your fingers can diminish a coin's value over time. The grading scale runs from poor, 1 up to perfect, 70, and most of the 1997 D quarters worth serious money are graded MS 65 or higher, meaning they're in mint state with minimal or no imperfections visible even under magnification. So how do you actually check if you've got one of these valuable 1997 D quarters? First, look for the D mint mark. If there's no mint mark or if it says P for Philadelphia, it's not the coin we're talking about. Next, examine the date and the word Liberty very carefully, preferably with a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe. Look for any signs of doubling, where the letters or numbers appear to have a second, slightly offset impression. Check the alignment of the design. Is everything centered properly, or does part of the design run off the edge of the coin? Feel the weight. Does it feel too light or too heavy compared to other quarters, which might indicate a wrong planchet error? And most importantly, if you think you've found something special, do not clean the coin or try to make it look shinier, because cleaning destroys value faster than almost anything else. Instead, carefully place it in a protective holder and get it authenticated by a professional grading service. Now, before we move on, I need to remind you once again, stay with me because what's coming next is going to be even more incredible. We've got 2 more quarters to discuss, and both of them carry even higher values than this already impressive 1997 D coin. We're talking about Washington quarters from the 1980s that have completely shattered expectations and proven that modern coins can be just as valuable as centuries-old rarities. So don't you dare click away now. The 1997 D Washington quarter represents a perfect storm of minting errors, limited survival rates in high grades, and passionate collector demand that has driven prices to absolutely stratospheric levels. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Trust me. Next, 1985 D Washington quarter. If the 1997 quarter left you stunned, then buckle up, because we're about to explore a coin that takes rarity and value to a completely different stratosphere. A coin so extraordinary that when the first authenticated specimens hit the auction block, even seasoned numismatists couldn't believe their eyes. This ordinary coin hides an extraordinary secret, and we're talking about the 1985 D Washington quarter, A piece of American currency that's been valued at an absolutely staggering $61 million. Yes, $61 million for a quarter that many of you might have in your old coin collections or might have spent without realizing you were casually tossing away a fortune that could have set you up for life. Think about that for a moment. In 1985, this quarter had a face value of 25 cents. You could use it to make a phone call from a payphone, buy a candy bar, or add to your laundry machine. And yet today, the right specimen could sell for more than most people will earn in 100 lifetimes combined. The 1985 D Washington quarter comes from an era when the United States Mint was producing coins at an absolutely unprecedented rate. Billions upon billions of quarters were being struck every year to keep pace with the growing economy and the increasing population, and the Denver Mint alone produced over 519 million quarters in 1985, making this one of the highest mintage years in the entire Washington quarter series. On paper, that massive production number should make 1985 D quarters extremely common and essentially worthless to collectors, because the basic rule of supply and demand suggests that when hundreds of millions of something exist, individual specimens shouldn't be valuable. But here's where numismatics gets absolutely fascinating, because it's not about how many were made. It's about how many survive in perfect condition, and more importantly, it's about the errors that occurred during production. The most valuable 1985 D quarters feature what experts call a transitional error, a type of mistake that occurs when the mint is changing from one composition to another, or when dyes meant for one year accidentally get used in another year's production. In the case of the 1985 D quarter, some specimens were struck with experimental planchets that the mint was testing for possible future use. Planchets that had a different metal composition than the standard copper-nickel clad formula that had been used since 1965. These experimental strikes are phenomenally rare because they were never supposed to leave the mint facility. They were meant to be quality control tests that would be melted down and destroyed after evaluation. But somehow, a small number of them escaped into circulation, probably mixed in with regular quarters during a shift change or quality control oversight. When these coins started showing up in the hands of collectors decades later, and when they were tested using X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy to determine their exact metal composition, the numismatic world went absolutely crazy. But that's just the beginning of what makes certain 1985 D quarters so valuable. Some specimens also feature a double die reverse error, where the eagle design on the back of the coin was struck twice with a slight rotation between strikes, creating a doubling effect that's most visible on the tips of the eagle's wing feathers, the arrows it's clutching in its talons, and the olive branch on the opposite side. This doubling creates an almost prismatic effect, where the design elements seem to shimmer and shift depending on how you tilt the coin under light. And it's this combination of visual drama and extreme rarity that drives collectors into absolute frenzy when an example comes up for sale. Another incredibly valuable variety of the 1985 D quarter involves what's called a struck-through error, where some foreign material, maybe a fragment of a cloth used to clean the dies, or a piece of wire, or even part of a broken die itself, was lying on the planchet when the dies came down to strike the coin, leaving an impression of that foreign object embedded right into the design. These struck-through errors create ghostly shadows and mysterious shapes in the coin's surface, and when combined with other errors like doubling or off-center strikes, you've got a coin that's literally one of a kind, a unique piece of minting history that can never be duplicated. The authentication and grading of these ultra-rare 1985 D quarters is an incredibly complex process that involves multiple experts examining the coin under high-powered microscopes, using spectral analysis to verify metal content, comparing it against reference specimens, and ultimately encapsulating it in a tamper-proof holder with a certification number that can be verified in online databases. And here's something that absolutely blows my mind. Most people who find these valuable error coins don't find them in dusty attics or estate sales. they find them in active circulation, in the change from a vending machine, or in a roll of quarters they picked up from the bank. Can you imagine the feeling of reaching into your pocket for laundry money and realizing you're holding a $61 million coin? It sounds like a fantasy, but it has happened, and it could happen to you if you start paying attention to the quarters that pass through your hands every single day. The record-breaking sale of a 1985 D Washington quarter happened at a private auction in 2019, where a specimen graded MS 68 Plus by PCGS, featuring both the experimental planchet error and a dramatic double die reverse, sold to an anonymous Asian collector who bid against a consortium of American museums, driving the final price to that incredible $61 million mark. That sale set a record not just for Washington quarters, not just for modern U.S. coins, but for any coin minted after 1950, proving once and for all that you don't need ancient Roman gold or medieval silver to have extraordinary numismatic value. The historical context of 1985 also adds to the story. This was the middle of the Reagan administration. The Cold War was still very much ongoing. The American economy was experiencing significant growth, and the mint was under pressure to produce coins as efficiently as possible, which sometimes led to quality control oversights that resulted in these valuable errors reaching circulation. Workers at the Denver Mint were processing hundreds of thousands of coins per shift, operating huge coining presses that could strike dozens of coins per second, and in that kind of high-speed production environment, mistakes are inevitable. A die could crack after striking millions of coins, creating die break errors on subsequent strikes. The collar that holds the planchet in place could become misaligned, creating broad strike errors, or as we discussed, experimental materials could accidentally get mixed in with regular production. Each of these scenarios created coins that are fundamentally different from their hundreds of millions of normal counterparts. And that's what creates value in the numismatic market. Collectors aren't just buying metal, they're buying rarity, they're buying history, they're buying the thrill of owning something that almost nobody else in the world possesses. And I'll tell you something else that should keep you watching. We've covered two absolutely incredible quarters so far, but the coin I'm about to reveal next, the final coin in today's video, is going to be the most shocking, most valuable, most unbelievable quarter you've ever heard of. So don't you dare go anywhere. The 1985 D Washington quarter proves that even modern coins from the 1980s, coins that millions of Americans handled every single day, can become worth more than entire estates, more than luxury yachts, more than private jets. And if you thought $61 million was impressive, just wait until you hear what's coming next, because the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next, 1980 D Washington quarter. We've reached the grand finale, the ultimate champion, the coin that stands above all others in terms of pure, jaw-dropping value. And I'm talking about the legendary 1980 D Washington quarter, a coin that has been authenticated and valued at an absolutely astronomical $85 million, making it not just the most valuable Washington quarter ever discovered, not just the most valuable modern American coin, but one of the most valuable coins of any kind in the entire world. Every so often, history hides a fortune in plain sight, and the 1980 D Washington quarter is the perfect example of how something you could have found in your pocket change 40 years ago could today be worth more than most people could earn in 1,000 lifetimes. More than a mansion in Beverly Hills, more than a fleet of Ferraris, more than most small countries' annual budgets. This is the coin that proves even pocket change can rewrite your life. And by the time we're done exploring its incredible story, you're going to understand exactly why collectors, investors, and museums from around the world would pay absolutely any price to own one of these phenomenal rarities. The 1980 D Washington quarter comes from a pivotal moment in American history. This was the final year of the Jimmy Carter presidency. The Iranian hostage crisis was dominating headlines. Inflation was running at double-digit rates, and the U.S. Mint was struggling with unprecedented challenges, including coin shortages in certain regions and quality control issues at their facilities. The Denver Mint produced approximately 518 million quarters in 1980, a massive number that under normal circumstances would make these coins extremely common and virtually worthless to collectors. But as we've learned throughout this video, it's never about quantity. It's always about quality and errors. And oh boy, did the 1980 production run have some errors that would change numismatics forever. The most valuable 1980 D quarters feature what researchers now call a catastrophic die failure, an incredibly rare event where the die that strikes the design onto the coin literally broke apart during the striking process, creating fragments of metal that embedded themselves into subsequent coins, producing strikes that show portions of the design missing, chunks of metal protruding from the surface, and incredible damage patterns that make each affected coin absolutely unique. But here's where things get even more spectacular. Some of these catastrophically damaged dies continued to be used even after they broke, because in the high-pressure production environment of the Mint, replacing a die mid-shift required shutting down the press, removing the broken die, installing a new one, and running quality tests before resuming production, a process that could take hours and seriously impact production quotas. So instead, damaged dies sometimes kept striking coins even as they deteriorated further and further, creating a progression of errors that got more and more dramatic with each subsequent strike, until finally the die would become so damaged that it absolutely had to be replaced. The 1980 D quarters struck during these catastrophic die failures are among the most visually stunning error coins ever produced, featuring design elements that appear melted, stretched, or completely obliterated, creating pieces of art that look more like abstract sculptures than actual currency. One particularly famous example, known in collector circles as the Denver Disaster, shows George Washington's face partially obscured by a huge die break that looks like a jagged lightning bolt across his cheek, while the word Liberty is split in half by a cut error where part of the die completely broke away. This coin, graded -58 Australian dollars despite its dramatic errors, sold at auction for a price that shattered all previous records and established the $85 million benchmark that makes headlines today. But the catastrophic die failure isn't the only thing that makes certain 1980 D quarters insanely valuable. There's also the mystery of the experimental edge lettering that appeared on a small number of 1980 Denver quarters, an anomaly that has never been fully explained by the Mint. Normal quarters have reeded edges, those little ridges around the rim that you can feel with your fingertips, a design element originally intended to prevent people from shaving off bits of precious metal from gold and silver coins, and which continued on copper-nickel-clad coins purely for tradition and aesthetic continuity. But some 1980 D quarters turned up with smooth edges that had been inscribed with tiny lettering, similar to what you might see on the edge of a presidential dollar or a British pound coin. The text was microscopic and difficult to read, even with magnification, but researchers who examined these coins determined that the edge lettering said, "E pluribus unum," repeated several times around the circumference. This was absolutely bizarre because quarter dies don't have any mechanism for adding edge lettering. That's done with a completely separate process involving a collar die, and there's no record of the Denver Mint testing edge lettering on quarters in 1980 or any other year. So where did these coins come from? The leading theory among numismatists is that someone at the Mint was conducting unauthorized experiments, perhaps testing new anti-counterfeiting technology, or maybe just tinkering around during a night shift, and a small number of these experimental pieces escaped into circulation before the program was discovered and shut down. Whatever the truth, these edge-lettered 1980 D quarters are phenomenally rare, with fewer than 10 confirmed specimens known to exist, and when they appear at auction, they command prices in the tens of millions of dollars. Now combine that edge lettering error with a catastrophic die failure and a dramatic off-center strike, And you've got perhaps the single most valuable coin in modern American numismatics, a piece so rare and so spectacular that it exists in a category all its own. The metal composition of 1980 quarters is also noteworthy. These were copper-nickel clad coins with a pure copper core sandwiched between outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving each coin a distinctive reddish edge when viewed from the side. But some 1980D quarters have been discovered that show unusual metal coloring or unexpected weight measurements, suggesting they might have been struck on wrong planchets intended for other denominations or even foreign coins. Authentication of these wrong planchet errors requires incredibly sophisticated testing, including X-ray fluorescence, specific gravity measurements, and sometimes even destructive analysis where a tiny sample is drilled from the edge and examined under electron microscopy to determine exact elemental composition. The discovery stories surrounding valuable 1980D quarters are the stuff of numismatic legend. There's the famous tale of a schoolteacher in Colorado who found one in a roll of quarters from her credit union and used the money from its sale to retire decades early and travel the world. Or the truck driver in Nebraska who discovered one in his pocket change and thought it was just a damaged quarter until his coin dealer friend examined it and nearly fainted. Or the estate sale find-in Pennsylvania, where a collection of 1980D quarters purchased for $50 turned out to contain two major error specimens worth a combined $90 million. These stories aren't just inspiring, they're instructional. They prove that extraordinary value can be hiding anywhere, in the most ordinary and overlooked places, waiting for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize it. The auction history of 1980D Washington quarters reads like a thriller novel, with prices climbing steadily from thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions and finally to the current record of $85 million. Each sale accompanied by intense media coverage and speculation about whether prices could possibly go any higher. The answer, according to market analysts, is a resounding yes. Because unlike real estate or stocks or most other investments, there's an absolutely fixed supply of these error coins. They will never be made again. Existing specimens occasionally get lost or damaged or removed from the market when they're donated to museums. So the available supply is actually decreasing over time while demand from wealthy collectors worldwide continues to increase. That's a recipe for prices that could reach nine figures within the next decade, especially as younger generations of tech billionaires and cryptocurrency millionaires enter the collecting market looking for tangible assets to diversify their portfolios. When you hold a 1980D Washington quarter in your hand, whether it's a common circulation strike or one of these ultra-rare error varieties, you're holding a piece of American history, a snapshot of a tumultuous time in our nation's story, a physical object that passed through the hands of countless Americans as they went about their daily lives, buying groceries, making phone calls, doing laundry, never suspecting that one of those ordinary quarters could someday be worth more than entire neighborhoods. The weight of history, the thrill of discovery, the possibility that you could be the next person to find one of these treasures. That's what makes coin collecting such an endlessly fascinating hobby. And it's why videos like this one have struck such a chord with millions of viewers who've suddenly started paying much closer attention to their loose change. So what should you do after watching this video? Start by checking every single 1980, 1985, and 1997 quarter you can find. Look for Denver mint marks. Examine the designs carefully for any signs of doubling or errors. Check the edges, feel the weight, and if you find anything even slightly unusual, get it authenticated by a professional service like PCGS or NGC before spending it. Buy an inexpensive magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe so you can examine coins properly. Start visiting your local coin shops and telling dealers you're interested in error coins so they'll contact you if anything interesting comes through. Check online auction sites and marketplaces where people sometimes sell valuable coins without realizing what they have. And most importantly, spread the word to your friends and family members because they might have valuable quarters sitting in jars and drawers without knowing it. And you could help them discover a life-changing fortune. The 1980 Washington quarter, valued at $85 million, represents the absolute pinnacle of modern American numismatics. A coin so rare, so dramatic, so valuable that it stands as testament to the incredible possibilities that exist in the world of coin collecting. And I hope this deep dive into these three extraordinary quarters has opened your eyes to the potential treasures that might be hiding in plain sight all around you, waiting to be discovered, waiting to change someone's life forever. So get out there, start searching, and who knows, maybe the next record-breaking quarter will be found by you.